Okay, we are recording. So I'm explaining a priori principles in morality. They must be prior to all experience, not just prior in the sense that temporal priority, but in principle, independent of all experience, because that's the only way they can be necessary and universal. Because Kant believes experience, by its very nature, can always be different. It can always be something else. So experience, and that he learns from British empiricism, from Hume's skepticism mostly. David Hume is a British philosopher that Kant read before, and the problem of induction, that you can never really say anything universal and unchanging and necessary from experience. Experience is always at the moment or in principle contingent. Therefore, a priori principles are independent of experience, not just prior. So their source is not in the experience. It can be a definition, it can be reason, as in the case of the moral law. It is the way in which human reason processes morality. But the point is, if you know something to be moral, Kant believes you cannot know it contingently. You cannot say, oh, let me engage in action and see what the consequences are and experience the consequences and decide whether it is moral or not. You cannot do that. That's not the nature of morality. You ought to know before any experience whether your action is moral or not. To know that, of course, you cannot judge it by its consequences, but you have to judge it by its principle. Because the consequences are always subject to experience. Now, this leads to this curious situation that Kant always is accused of. You might have like a good intention, but you produce really bad results. And Kant would double down on that. He would say, yes, I cannot foresee the consequences. I cannot know the consequences, and I cannot really be held responsible for things that I cannot control. And that's his reasoning in terms of the a priori nature of moral principles. Connor, is that clear?
Yeah, that made it clear. Yeah.
And a posteriori, in contrast, means posterior to experience, after the experience, that you can look up and say, the sky is never blue. The sky is not blue in Richmond, and it's not going to be blue for a while. And that's always an experience. Good question. Okay, well, this is good because you don't want to make mistakes like that in your papers. Any other questions? Misha, whenever you are ready. I save these chats, you know, I mean, for posteriority. So.
I have a question. Oh, okay. I'm gonna do the question later then.
Okay. Would it be fair to say that attempted practice of the mind? Okay. Anybody? Would it be fair, if you look at the chat, would it be fair to say that an attempt at practicing autonomy undermines morality by making freedom a desire? Well, what does Kant call that? That's on page, it's on the third section. Anybody can answer that question? That's a good question, Misha. would it be fair to say that an attempt practicing autonomy, or desire to be free, I guess, right, undermines morality by making freedom a desire? Anybody wants to make an attempt to answer that question? What do you think?
I am not like 100% sure, but doesn't he mention how a free will and a will subject to moral laws are the one and the same? Does he not mention somewhere in the book about that?
Sure. Free will and subject to the moral, absolutely. But if I understand Misha's question correctly, she's asking, what if I desire to be moral? What if I want to be moral? What if I want to be free? Isn't that undermining morality or freedom in that case by being a desire of human beings? So I explained this, or we touched upon this a little bit, when some people say, oh, I love being moral. That makes me happy. Being moral really sort of makes my heart melt, and I'm such a good person. I always do incredible deeds, and I love helping people. I love, like, all these kinds of desires that are expressed in the name of morality. Doesn't that undermine freedom? Because you are disposed naturally to be moral, and not all of us are, right? So yeah, so should you not want to be moral at all? Should you not want to be free in order for it to be genuine freedom? No, yeah, exactly, that expression, yeah. So what is a good answer to that, or a response to that? That should have been the paper question. Anybody? Josh, do you want to take a stab at it?
Is it the like desire to? Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Josh,
go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry. Is it that like desire to be free is like, it's more of like a like inclination or like personal desire, and then that's heteronomy, and thus it's, I mean, you have like wanting to be moral is like you have like other interest, like to, or like reason to be moral, and that's not that's like affected by others, and thus it's not like categorical imperative, but it's more of like hypothetical imperative.
Exactly, and that is the problem. That is, I think, if I understand Misha correctly, that's exact problem that Kant faces. So how do we respond to that? So is this like a simple paradox, like, if you want to be free, you cannot be free? If you desire to be free, you cannot be free. If you desire to be moral, you cannot be moral. I mean, that seems a little problematic, at least, if we interpret it that way. So, Josh, but you were going to give an answer, right?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that you're then putting your wants ahead of being moral and therefore being rational.
Okay. So, but like, should I not ever desire to be moral?
I don't know if I have an answer to that.
Okay. But now you are like facing a, okay, and it's not a very big, but it's a philosophical problem. And then your ability to think your way through this might help you to understand how we sort of philosophize with philosophical problems. If you have a dilemma like this, I give you a clue. The best way is to make a distinction. Make a distinction. That will help you to deal with this problem a little bit. I don't know whether it will be convincing, but yeah.
One idea I have is like, there's a difference between wanting to be moral and doing things because you want to be moral. And so like you can
Wow, that's a very good thing.
have it be like the right things.
That's a very subtle distinction, yes. But some people might think, who are not familiar with philosophy, oh, you are just playing with words. It's the same thing. You know, philosophy is so, I mean, they wouldn't say it to you, but that would be it. Desire to be moral and doing it because you want to be moral, that's the same. So, I mean, I think that your distinction is good.
I checked my email and I was just like, yeah, it's time for me to get it.
Are you talking to us, Blake? No. Okay. So, but you're on the right track. No, yeah. So, what is the distinction you want to make there?
Well, I think that you like, because in order to be moral, like usually there is like, you want to be moral, but you don't always do things in order to be moral. And so like trying to find a way to like set the want aside and not have it drive things. But then, yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so can we characterize this distinction in terms of like, imagine these two people. One of them is like, okay, I won't record this part because it might be public, but so somebody wants to be moral because they want to display their morality, they want to be perceived and admired for being moral, etc. That is what you call desire to be moral. But that desire is the desire of something else. So that's not, they are using being moral as a means for another end, namely to be perceived in a certain way, to have a reputation, etc. So that we might distinguish from what he calls a rational interest in being moral. So that is not a desire to be moral for the sake of something else, but a rational interest in morality, in which case you are not doing it for anybody else, for anything else, but for the sake of itself. Therefore, technically, it should be, you should be indifferent to its being seen or admired. So if you really want to be, this is the paradox of, if you really want to be moral, especially in the 21st century, don't make it known to anybody. Because as soon as somebody knows and admires you, one would immediately be suspicious, that's why you are doing it. If you want to be moral, don't say it. Because when you say, I want to be moral, you are not simply expressing your rational interest in morality, which should be independent of all your wants and desires, but you are expressing a desire to be seen that way. I want to be perceived that way. I want to be a good person. I want to be understood and approved and applauded for being a good person. Now, it's still not bad. I mean, I'm not, that's better than being a criminal, I suppose. So it is not like we are judging everybody, etc. But that really undermines our sense of morality. And that's really like the entire field that I consider to be business ethics. They are really following certain so-called ethical moral laws because they want to make money. So I really cannot honestly be sort of what is the expression? I cannot believe even that they are really honest in their values, because I know they are doing it for the sake of something else. So I can't be impressed by their actions if I can see their motives being profit. So if you are doing it for the sake of profit, and this is rational reasoning, and if you are telling me, if any one of you can say, oh yeah, it doesn't matter, that's what morality is about anyway. It's just getting people do certain things that happen to be acceptable by society at the time. There is no other higher morality. The ethics of corporate capitalism is the only possible morality, because we sort of push each other to do certain things, and they do it for the sake of whatever reason, I don't care, as long as they do the right thing. But you also know, like, since they are doing the right thing now, they might do the wrong thing when the motive is just for profit, once being moral is not profitable anymore. And in fact, to be honest, it isn't profitable. I mean, they are sort of supporting certain social issues in principle, etc., but economically, they are perpetuating all the injustices and immoral acts at the same time. So, therefore, yes, that's a really good question. So, like, and then that goes back to Nolia's question. If you aren't really moral, then it's not seen. It's not visible. It's not like, and then you go like, why should I be moral if nobody's going to admire me for being moral? And then maybe that's the only way go to heaven. I don't know. So that these are all like legitimate, interesting questions. Now, you always kind of use being confused as a sort of state of mind, etc. But you should be confused. You should be confused, not like about concepts and ideas in the book, etc. But you should be confused that there is really a very difficult question in front of you that cannot be resolved. So that's a good confusion. You should have that confusion and think about that whenever you are encountering these questions. That confusion should not go away, because it only goes away at the expense of substituting something for it. So it's like, oh, this is what is morality for me. It's like, don't do that. That's bad. That's not good. That's just sort of being dogmatic in order for your comfort of not being confused. So yes, these philosophical questions remain as questions, and it is very difficult. So yes, like, you know, you are only free when you are only moral if you are not perhaps even recognized as such. Sometimes you can't even recognize yourself whether you are moral or not. I mean, I'm like, I do certain things, I don't even know why I'm doing it, because maybe not doing it would be insufferable and it would be bad. Like, for example, this is a great example I can give. Like, you ask for extension for your papers. It's like, why do I give you extensions? I ask that to myself. I say, well, maybe I don't want them to hate me, which is really not a very good excuse, not a very good reason. And I want to be popular, maybe, or I want to, you know, whatever the reason, I don't really know. I just do it. And I say like, oh, I'm a good person, that's why. No, you're not. You're just like sucking up to people. And most of the time, that's what we are doing. Like, you know, especially on social media, I realize like a lot of people are saying like wonderful and great things about each other. It's just like, why? Because they want to appear to be good people. And that appearance aspect is really the dilemma for Kant, because when you try to appear in a certain way, that's almost always not, at least not authentic. Okay, Misha, I knew we were going to ask a good question. Dai, you had something.
The moment I need to copy my
Sure.
question to the chat. Just copy from the book. So, never mind. So my question is like, does the relationship between like freedom and morals kind of like a paradox? Because like, as we mentioned before, like you want freedom, you cannot have freedom. It's like there is with that, but it's like the well, yes, but actually no, and is control freedom. I could quote from that the best result out of that relationship. So I think basically, so for you guys to understand, control freedom is like you have freedom but with exceptions. It's kind of like the freedom of speech. Like you're allowed to say this, but you're allowed to say anything you want. But there's like things that you should not speak or say that.
Good question. Anybody wants to? Sorry. So I think that's how we already started to pose the question. Isn't this a paradox? You are only free when you follow the moral law. How would you start answering this question? What page would you start to answer this question? There's a page number on the book that would be a good place to answer this question. I give you a clue, it's between 20 and 25. Anybody? Nobody? I give you another clue, between 22 and 24.
Page 23.
Thank you. What specifically?
Everything in nature works according to laws.
Okay.
And then that part, but I don't really know how. I just know that's an important part. I don't know how to connect it to this.
Well, this is Kant's conviction that when you are not acting according to the moral law, you are still acting according to a law. So as I said, page 23, I juxtaposed that on page 13, when the will, human will, the reason why you are doing what you are doing is at the crossroads between a priori principles, now we know what a priori principle is, and then a posteriori incentives. So there is always a reason why you are doing what you are doing. And if you are following your natural instincts and think that that's freedom, you are simply acting according to laws of nature. So whenever you do something that you desire, and if you think that it is your desire, therefore you are free, actually you are mistaken according to Kant. You are thinking a natural law as your own law. You think that you are free. And that's 99.9% of all our freedoms. I am free to do what I want. That's the counterintuitive part in Kant. I mean, counterintuitive, actually, it's correct, but it's still counterintuitive. Namely, what you want is not what you want. what you want is not yours. What you want is not something that you authentically decide as a human being. You are determined by laws of nature. So in fact, the paradox is not between the freedom and the law, because there is no possibility of being free outside of the law. You can be free only according to moral law, which you determine as a rational being. But as an empirical being, as a sort of bodily creature, you are subject to laws. And, you know, I don't know, my assumption is like 21st century, more and more is proving Kant to be right. Because if you watch, like, for example, Social Dilemma, I want to buy a shoe. I am dying to buy a shoe, and I have the power, hopefully, and the freedom to buy the shoe. I have the freedom to consume. More and more, I notice that that is really a desire that is instilled in me by outside forces. So when I think that I'm free, that's really the beauty of it. That's when I am least free, because I have this illusion that I am making free decisions, which means I don't know why I want what I want. And in that sense, human beings, just like machines, just like, I mean, not even artificial intelligence, because they don't consume in the same way, but we just have these desires that are triggered in us. So only moral law is something that can come from something that is outside of all these natural laws. Now, does that make sense to you? Because this is important for you to, now, you might disagree with Kant, you might not think like that yet at all, that's fine. But as long as you understand why Kant is saying what he's saying in terms of freedom, because he is convinced that in this mechanistic world, all the things that happen in nature happen according to laws. There's always a reason. As I said last time, you can. So does that answer your question? That I don't really see the paradox from Kant's perspective.
I mean, like, yeah, it's kind of have an answer to that. The rest, I think I have to think of for myself then.
Sure.
Because sometimes it's kind of a paradox to me. Like, what if like it's freedom, but if it's not freedom, then what is freedom? Kind of like that. I sometimes I ask myself like that.
Okay, that's a very good question. He answers that. Of course, you might not accept that, but he says, freedom is the property of this causality that makes it effective, independent of any determination by alien causes. So really, freedom becomes a question of authenticity, like namely the question of like, do I act not by alien causes, but from causes from within myself as a rational being? I mean, I believe it is to be an ideological miracle that so many people believe that they are free when so many people aren't. It's almost like this inverse relationship. The more you believe you are free, the less free you are. Yes, right.
So would it be right to say that freedom is more of like a responsibility?
Responsibility to the moral law.
Yeah, like, because I mean, based off like our society, you know, like freedom has a completely different definition than what like Kant has been saying. So like, I don't know, with reading this, I feel like freedom is more of like a responsibility than like a natural like thing.
Certainly, that's what Kant would believe, yes.
Okay.
And responsibility is a good term because in responsibility, there is the notion of response. You are responding. What are you responding to? You are responding to the moral law. Yes, that's like it's like an answer. You are answering the call of the moral law that is in you as a rational being, or it is in the structure of your reason. Yeah, that's a good observation. Alvaro, do you want to ask your question because you are writing the protocol? Rosie asked her question, so.
Well, mine was actually just, I figured it out after class because like I went over the notes, but I mean, if you want me to
Share with
say
us.
it,
And
yeah, it's actually, it's pretty simple, but like when we were talking about, it was what does Kant mean by ends in themselves and means to an end, and then I kind of like went through my notes and I figured it out that ends in themselves is that like it ends like your desire, or I mean there's your action, it ends there. There's no specific desire that you want it to no specific outcome that you want from that. So I figured, yeah,
but he
unless
also.
there's something more to that, you know.
Okay. But as you discussed the several formulations of the categorical imperative, we didn't really go through that, did we? We didn't go through the specific formulations. I mentioned some of them, but on page 36, he writes, act in such a way that you treat humanity. I read this, right? That you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of another, always at the same time as an and never simply as a means. So this is probably related to what you are asking in terms of as an and in itself. Human beings, to the extent that they are rational, need to be treated as the end of your action, never as a means for another end, because then you are subordinating the value of human being as a rational being to some other desire that you have, that you are using. Now, if you look at it, I think that's a fairly good principle that really works for most of our actions, because when you lie to someone, you are obviously using that person to achieve another end, to get away from. You are not respecting the person. When you kill someone, obviously, like you are killing for a business or for profit or something, you are really not treating them as an end in itself. You are treating them as you really mean. Then you look at, you look at this principle, and then you look at the way in which we organize our societies, and you realize, again, I don't want to give a precise percentage, but more often than not, we are treated as a means for another end rather than an end in itself. You as students are treated as a means for an end. Like we give you the impression that we are really treating you as an end in itself, right? Do you feel that? Do you feel like you are being treated as a end in itself? Alvaro is saying no. So how are you treated as a means? How are we all treated as a means? It's very simple. This is it's very like contemporary current discussion. Think of the ways in which we are treated as a means for an end. Make no mistake, you are treating each other and me, etc., as a means for an end too. But you are also being treated as a means for an end. So what's your end? What are you good for? What?
Well, in relation to Erlom, are you asking?
Sure. I mean, I will not record that part, but
Oh. Or does it necessarily have to be something bad or negative?
well, in terms of its result, it might not be relative. I don't really mind being used, etc. But it is certainly not a moral act. So it doesn't mean that it's an immoral act. It might be an amoral act, namely, it has nothing to do with morality. That's a very important distinction, because just because an action doesn't mean that it's not moral for Kant, doesn't mean it's immoral. It might be just outside of morality. It might be outside of that consideration. So if you believe that a society should not be organized around morality at all, but it should be organized around utility, you might say morality should not even be a consideration. But then you cannot bring morality into the discussion. So this is, for example, politically speaking, what I love, like, okay, I'm not talking about Democrats or Republicans in favorably one way or the other, but that's what Democrats do. It's like they do all the utility and then bring up the question of morality as a means for another end. So they use morality like at the last minute as an afterthought. This was like a typical Clinton response, like, we'll invade you, we'll kill you because it's to our interest, etc. And then I additionally want, this is the right thing to do. No, you don't get that. You don't get that the moral high road just after having set all the desires and interests, etc. So now, it might not be a good thing. So I'm hungry. I'm going to go eat. I don't kill anybody in the process. I do participate in an exploitive society, sure. But that action in and of itself, because of its principle, is really following laws of nature. So it is neither moral, because it's just simply eating, not immoral. It's natural. It's amoral. Amoral in the sense that it is outside of the purview. So I don't want you to going around and sort of thinking like, oh, I read Kant, therefore, oh, moral, not moral, moral, not moral. No, don't be sort of this hyper judgmental approach to every action. Certain actions are not moral or immoral. And for the most part, that's good. Like, we don't need to judge. But when you do an act that is natural, based on your interest, and in addition claim to be moral, that's a problem. That's a political problem, that's a discursive problem, and that's hypocrisy. And that undermines the sense of morality. Morality must be rare for it to preserve its value. Now, certain actions, and that is going to be a really important element for Kant and subsequent philosophers after Kant thought, especially like Friedrich Schelling, who is a sort of not contemporary, but coming after Kant, said, well, you are either acting according to laws of nature, right? In which case you are really not responsible for your actions, or you are acting according to laws of morality, in which case you are good. So what is the possibility of human evil? Where does evil come from? Is there such a thing as evil? Namely, doing something absolutely immoral. According to Kant, when I do something immoral, it's just following the laws of nature. But I'm not evil by following the laws of nature. I'm created that way, and I have my natural desires. I didn't make these laws, so I'm acting according to them. Now, is it possible to commit free evil? Because for Kant, freedom is always good because you are following the moral law. So we don't end with Kant. Kant is not the last word. He teaches us a lot of things and teaches us how to think about certain hypocritical people, etc. But Kant has a problem of explaining how is it that human beings, the only creatures in the universe, can act, well, I don't know the universe, let's just say the world, how they can act in an evil way. What's the possible, is there such a thing as evil? Like a lot of people, don't believe that there is such a thing as evil, but there is really no possibility of explaining truly evil people according to Kant. Does that make sense as a issue, as a philosophical question? It's not in your papers. You don't have to deal with that in your papers, but I want you to understand it because I don't want you to like neatly package everything and then say, oh, this is Kant and go consume it, etc. There are problems to be addressed after having read Kant and understand his notion of morality. Do you understand this problem? Geneva does, I know, but thank you.
Is it like evil is outside of Kant's theory structure? Because
outside of Kant's theory structure, what?
I mean, is evil outside Kant's theory? Or we are assuming the opposite of evil is moral, which doesn't seem to make sense to me if that's the case.
What doesn't make sense? That the fact that evil is the opposite of moral. Of course.
I'm just trying to clarify whether you mean the opposite of evil is moral or didn't you didn't mean it.
Okay, let me try again. Now, for Kant, the will is either determined by a posteriori incentives, like your desires, laws of nature, or by moral laws. Now, by definition, I think that moral law is good, morally good, because I cannot make something evil, like let's just say lying, a moral principle. So by definition, it is free of contradiction, and therefore it is the moral law. My question, it's not my question, but the question that was posed to Kant afterwards said, so what is the possibility of evil? It is not right, it doesn't seem right to accuse people of evil when they are simply following laws of nature. But the only way they don't follow the laws of nature is to follow the laws of morality. But then they are good. So they are either evil for reasons that are not up to them, because they are natural laws, or they are good. So is there such a thing as pure evil, which is neither natural nor good? Because if something is natural, it's, I don't know, I don't consider that evil. Some interpretation of certain religions consider to be things that are natural and to follow them as evil. I don't see that. I cannot, Kant doesn't see that either. Like if you are, I don't know, if you are having sex outside of wedlock, I don't think that's evil. That's just, but certainly, you should not have sex or whatever. So we consider certain things associated with our body in all religions, pretty much, not all religions, but all Abrahamic religions, pretty much. We consider certain things that are natural and bodily as evil, but it's not. That's not really truly authentic evil, because like, like, to have a body, like I cannot be responsible for that. I cannot be responsible for the laws that govern my body as evil. So the question then for Kant is, okay, we grant you that laws of nature can't cover evil or explain evil. So what does? What explains evil? Unnatural, yet not according to laws of moral. morality. And that becomes a question, a very significant question after Kant, because, and it is still a question. I mean, nobody pretends just because we are in the 21st century, we resolved the problem of evil at all. We don't even know whether it exists truly or authentically. And we certainly don't know what it is, except we constantly tell each other, you are evil, you are terrible, etc. Do you consider certain people evil? You do, Aaron? You were like very... I don't want to ask you on the spot who, so... Okay, enough to know that you do. So. Usually, probably people who hurt other people. That's our criterion, like humans who hurt other humans. That includes us too. Maybe not very in a maybe visible way, but we constantly hurt each other. In real ways, not just like hurt, like symbolically, but real. Okay, let's take a break. I'm getting a little tired. So like 13 minutes. Shall we come back at 10? And if you have questions, we'll continue. We'll continue even if you don't have questions. So, okay. Okay, the first one, first explicit one, the formula of the universal law. You should look at the footnotes. They are really helpful. On page 30, it says, act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. That is the general, Riley, I see you have a question. Let's just come back to that, okay? So this is what they call the formula of universal law. And then there are others that come later on in the text, starting I think on page 36. There's one on 36. Act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of another, always at the same time as an end and never simply as a means. And they say the formula of the end in itself, that's another formulation. But before that, there was one about the, on page 30 again, right below that universal law, the universal imperative of duty may be expressed as act as if the maxim of your action were to become through your will a universal law of nature. And that's a little confusing because laws of morality should not be laws of nature. So what Kant demands here is the same kind of necessity from the maxim of your action as you find in law of nature. And he says, as if is a counterfactual, it is not, but act as if it is a law of nature. So in a sense, there is this freedom, which is really a very important 19th century formulation of the idea of freedom. Freedom is doing what is necessary for a rational being. It's not arbitrariness. It is not willy-nilly acting according to your whims, etc. It is doing what is necessary. It has the same force of, I could not have done otherwise, which paradoxically, or seemingly paradoxically, becomes the expression of freedom. I must act in a certain way. And this must doesn't come from any laws of nature, but it comes from me as a rational being. I must do it. That is the force, absolute necessity of the moral law. And that's the only possibility of freedom according to Kant. So that's another formulation of categorical imperative, as if it is a law of nature. So if you discuss 3, I think that should be enough. Okay, does that help, Noah? Was it awesome? Yes. Did you say awesome? Yeah. Okay, so I'm reading Riley's. Riley, do you want to read your question?
Yes, sir. Is it possible to act both on the law of morality and the categorical imperative?
Okay, that's not how you spell imperative, but that's correct. So
well, I put a little.
Yes, I did. Yes, imperative.
Star.
Yeah. Now, Aaron, you smiled at that. You answer. Is it possible?
Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody was dropping my keys off. That's why I just said thank you.
That's okay.
I didn't hear what was said.
So is it possible to act both on the law of morality and categorical imperative?
She was smiling because it was such a bad question.
No, it's a great question. Aaron, what do you say? Say yes or no.
Also, to act both on the law of morality and categorical. Well, yeah, I guess.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
That's the only way to act according to. It is not only possible, but it is absolutely the only way to act. I mean, it's the same, acting according to the law of morality and categorical imperative. So, did you mean to say hypothetical imperative or something? Riley.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I guess then my example was what I meant was then clearly understand. So is it possible to act and have a quote unquote moral result, but your reasoning is mixed? So I gave the example just because it came to mind because I'm actually getting a dog. Is let's say that you're walking down the street, and then you see a dog trapped in the hot car. And so first of all, your inclination is to help the dog, but also, let's say that you're around some new people. And so, yeah, your first instinct is, yes, I need to help this dog. But then on some level, I think that a lot of people are well aware that, as we talked about, in this class, that morality or, quote unquote, good deeds will help them, socially to look good or to advance their career, blah, blah. And so I wonder if, they're also motivated by, hey, well, if I also do this good thing, then maybe people will think better of me. And so, to reiterate, could you get at this result as based on influences that aren't just moral?
Yes, that's a great question that comes back to trying to understand most of our actions. So all Kant would say that it's certainly not immoral. It might contaminate the purity of your action if you are doing it to show off, but it doesn't make it immoral, at least. But it doesn't make it purely moral. But the point is, we don't really know why you saved the dog. No one can know it other than you. And it's really you, as that goes back to the question whether we can really know somebody is free or acting out of morality. When you save the dog, well, generally, I mean, I'm not really sure that would, I mean, it's a good act socially. I'm not really sure that it would qualify moral. It's certainly not immoral. It's certainly a positive act. But
okay, what if we took it one step further, but it was probably going to piss some people off, is like, we could talk about the military.
Okay. Yeah. What do we say about military? Sorry, like to be in the military is a moral act or not?
Yeah, I mean, depending on how you feel, but then like you could join because the idea of serving the public is at least in my view is a good idea, or that's a admirable quality in a person. But then what do you say about the results of what the military or the police or anything like that has actually done, or what you are asked to do?
Sure. Let's think about that from a Kantian perspective. I don't know whether we'll manage to understand all the details, but military by definition is in conflict with the universality of morality, because you are really protecting one public over another public, right? So do you consider the military of your enemy as honorable as you? And that might be a question. Usually in the case of military, I mean, you hear this in public discourse, in popular media a lot, like there seems to be a moral clarity. We assume like we are good, they are bad. Now, what is good there? Is it a moral good, or is it possible for Kant to be a moral good? Absolutely not, because there you subordinate the question of morality to your national interest. You say, I'm good, you're bad, which by definition for Kant goes really against the nature of universality of morality. So we still have the problem to judge military action as immoral or not. We cannot do that easily from the perspective of Kant, but we can certainly judge them as not being moral. Because what you want for your own country, for your own military, for your own, society, you don't want it for the other society. You kill them. I mean, you kill them. That's the purpose of it. So that presupposes a clear distinction in our minds about, whether we are good and they are evil, they are bad. And that's the rhetoric, right? I mean, I hope you don't buy that rhetoric. You don't fall victim into that rhetoric when people say our enemies are evil. Well, first of all, even from a un-Kantian or like unrelated to Kant perspective, that is inconsistent, because historically we consider certain people evil for a certain period of time, and then they become our allies, then they are good. I mean, even as a military, we form alliances with people that we consider to be evil in the past, including all the, horrible people that we now consider to be horrible. We made sort of agreements with them for our own interest. So that's not even to me, maybe, please challenge this. Like, that doesn't appear to me as a meaningful discourse. We consider Taliban evil, and in the 80s, we considered them freedom fighters against Soviet Union. I mean, it's historical. It changes. And, we consider certain factions of Muslims to be evil depending on where they are in Syria. And then the others are good now. So if you really look at our strategies and our discourses, that distinction doesn't seem to be working at all. So then we consider ourselves like we are the good guys or whoever, and then you notice the things that you do and you consider, oh, maybe I'm not the good guy. I'm doing horrible things. Well, but I'm doing it for good reasons. So you are simply using other people as a means for an end, your national interest, period. So again, military, certainly for Kant, doesn't qualify as a legitimate discourse on morality. Again, I'm not saying that it's immoral. I'm just saying that it is other considerations at work there. National interest. Or, I mean, not even national interest, maybe like business interest. Maybe some people want to make money. Some people are greedy. So now, you cannot, if you have certain intentions and certain desires, you cannot just sort of add on a kind of law of morality to legitimize your actions as being moral. Now, in the case of dogs, it's actually a little bit more complicated because it's good to save the dog. I mean, so you should in a hot car, and everybody should do that. But everybody does it for different reasons. And it's really up to you to know why you are doing it. Like, would you do it if you don't have anybody to show off? And you probably would. So it's fine. Please save the dogs. So, I mean, there is really no moral ambiguity there. But you should also save all the other animals that are being slaughtered for you to eat burgers and stuff. So that's an interesting question. But I'm not a vegetarian, so I shouldn't be hypocritical here. So, but that's like one of the moral reasons why people become vegetarian. But if you are vegetarian because it takes too much water to produce burgers, and then it's going to undermine humanity in the future, that's really not a very valid reason. Does that make sense, Riley? I mean, does it, like, I don't know whether it helps you, but the first part of your question is absolutely yes. Law of morality and categorical imperative, that's really how you make your maxim a universal law of morality. That's absolutely not only possible, but it's necessary. It's the only way. But if you are asking, act according to law of morality, but then you don't really have any if you have additional incentive to do that, like showing off, is that still moral? And Kant would not be able to give you an answer because in each case you act according to your own will.
I see.
So certain questions are not answered, but as long as you understand why they are not answered and why it is difficult to determine at any given point whether saving a dog in and of itself is a is a moral act, Kant doesn't have an answer to that. So he really preserves the authenticity of morality while at the same time speaks to our sort of implicit desire not to judge people according to their moral action, according to their actions, whether they are moral or not, because we don't want to be judged either. I don't know whether your generation is still a non-judgmental generation, because at least the generation directly previously from you thought like judgment is bad. I don't know. What do you think? Like, I know Aaron judges people as evil, so you're all pro judgment, huh? So yeah, let's go back to that then. Who do you judge as evil?
Well, like you said, like people who hurt other people, and I know like everyone does it, but it's like people have intent to actually like hurt people, like you want to hurt people, I guess. Like I consider that evil, because why would you want to hurt someone else? I don't know. Yeah,
one needs to be careful there. Like are you talking about like psychopaths and stuff?
Well, yeah, psychopaths, but like also like other people, like you just want, like you purposely want to hurt someone, like their feeling, even like just their feelings, like that's evil. You want to make someone sad or like hurt their feelings, that's evil. I feel like, or to me it is.
Hurt their feelings.
Their feelings, them personally, anyway. Like if you actually like come for somebody and like intend to hurt them, that's evil, I think.
Well, sure, that would be, except that presupposes you know their intentions.
Yeah, I guess.
What if they hurt other people's feelings because everybody hurt their feelings all their lives? They are just simply following law of nature of, you are as vulnerable as a human being to anybody else, as anybody else.
Well, then I guess, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. You can't really, because I don't know their intent. I don't know what like they're thinking, but like from my perspective, I think it's evil, I guess, which is wrong because I shouldn't.
So do you consider someone like Bill Gates evil?
I don't know. I don't know.
Well, he hurts people a lot. But
I
then,
know. So I don't know.
that's in the morning. In the afternoon, he helps people. So it is really ambiguous in the sense that you don't know why he helps people and you don't know why he hurts people. He engages in certain business practices that make a lot of people hungry and jobless and etc. But then he says, oh, I'm saving those people in the afternoon with the amount of money I made.
Yeah, but that's also like, I don't know.
Could it be a balance sheet? Like, yes, I'm this much evil, but then I'm like 75% good. So I'm only 25%. Okay.
But then if the good is like benefiting him, then I feel like that's still like evil. Like when people hurt you for their own, but like that's evil.
Can I quote you on that? Because that's a really beautiful statement. If the good still benefits them, it's evil.
Yeah.
That is, yeah, that's very good. If the good is benefiting you, especially like financially, that's still evil. Good one. I mean, you can sort of look at what is happening in society nowadays. And it is really, we try to achieve the idea of morality in words. And that's really why we are having so much discussions about freedom of speech, what you said, what you didn't say, what you are allowed to say, what you are not allowed to say. You hurt people with your words or you don't hurt with people with your words, which are all valid questions, except they mostly become a cover to the things that we actually do. I really don't care about what you say. Well, I mean, I do. You shouldn't be a jerk and hurt people, but I don't care as much about what you say in public to other people as much as what you do in reality to cause certain harm to a lot of people. So that's really the maybe the, I don't know whether Kant gives us a guide or any kind of, it gives us a tool to think about what people say in order to really cover what their intentions are and why they do what they do. And for the most part, in society, we observe people do it for either the benefit of themselves, to benefit themselves, or in the American capitalism, benefit the shareholders. So, oh, we need to go for profit because our shareholders, like shareholders is this ultimate explanation of many things that we do. We need to do profit. We need to make profit. Sure. But then don't pretend to be moral, please. And saying this doesn't make you cynical. I mean, that's like, it doesn't make you like a, cynical person, or, it is really like, this is the reality. By believing that discourse, you are actually harming people more, because that's really the most, like, you are being disadvantaged and exploited and taken advantage of. On top of it, they say it's moral. I'm like, come on. I mean, at least if you are exploiting me, at least be honest and say I'm exploiting you. Bless you. Any other questions? I like it. This is much better than me talk. I mean, I'm still talking a lot, but
I have one.
Sure, go ahead.
I'll put it on chat.
Trust fund picks. Good one, Riley. How does heteronomy in defining relation? Okay. Does it play a role? Okay, I'm trying to.
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to understand the question. How does?
I mean, yeah, because I see it is the heteronomy is one of the suggestions from the paper, so I'm just curious.
Well, when I just read it on its own, like immediately my answer is that it doesn't play a role, because heteronomy is not freedom. It undermines freedom, because freedom is autonomy. And you need to be very careful to define Kant's notion of freedom in terms of autonomy. And autonomy is only preserved with respect to moral law, acting for the sake of moral law, because that's the only law that you can give to yourself as a rational being. Now, heteronomy distorts or undermines the relationship between moral law and freedom, because heteronomy is always doing it for the sake of something else, for another alien cause, as he puts it. So, and that alien cause includes the good of society, God, nation, any type of family even, right? So these are all heteronomous laws, and you are not moral. So one way of looking at it is that, are you treating all human beings as an end in itself in your actions? That might be one way of seeing whether your action is autonomous. Anybody else wants to add anything to how does heteronomy play a role in defining the relationship between freedom and moral law? Is the idea of heteronomy clear? It makes me so happy to see you move on the screen. Like most of the time you just stand there like, I don't even know whether the screen is frozen or not. So. Who didn't ask a question? Chang, did you ask a question?
No.
Did we? Yeah, do you have a question? No, you don't have a question? You didn't write your question?
Wait. So my question was sort of answered already last class.
Okay.
So I was just stretching.
So from now on, if you don't have any question, I'm going to assume that you know everything in your paper topic and you are all going to get an A. Is that a fair assumption? Or are you going to tell me, I don't even know what I don't know? Emily, did you ask? Yeah, you did ask a question last time, didn't you? Yeah. Josh, did you ask a question? No, ask a question. Okay, yeah. What's your question?
I wrote a question down last time, but I also have a question based on last class. Which would you?
It's up to you, either way.
I guess, okay. So last class, while we were discussing autonomy and heteronomy, you said something about how making your morality hypothetical is contradictory or a paradox or something like that. Can you clarify what you meant by that?
Well, the way in which this works best is in the case of lying, because when you subordinate morality to something else, that's usually an interest, and that interest is okay. So yeah, it's hard to explain that. Did I do that? What did I mean? So in the case of contradiction, it is you don't want to follow the moral law. You want to make an exception to the moral law, but you want the universal condition to be still believability. Therefore, you are actually wanting the universal condition to be telling the truth so that your lie functions as a lie. So we are clear on this, right? We understand the logic of this, right? Everybody, which you can explain in your papers. Okay. Now, in the case of heteronomy, you are subordinating the value of morality to something other than reason. So now, would that contradict? Well, it would. I'm not sure it's strictly speaking a contradiction, but I give the example always because it is familiar. We can give other examples, obviously, but I give the example of religion because most people claim or say that they base their morality on religion. Now, if you do that, and if you want to make that a universal principle, then you are facing a contradiction in a sense that what if you are not Christian? Because for Christianity to be a meaningful designation, it has to have non-Christians, because otherwise it is just everybody. So we wouldn't even discuss it. It would be the belief of everybody. So we already have that distinction between Christians and non-Christians so that it makes any sense. Now, maybe the issue here is that if everybody were to be Christian, then we wouldn't even have an issue. Like, it would be not even necessary to be Christian. Now, then you have this issue of, yes, non-Christians cannot be moral. Then you have the additional issue, you cannot really judge non-Christians according to the principles of Christianity. So they are not only incapable, unable to be moral, they don't even need to be moral. They don't even have the obligation or responsibility to be moral because they were not really exposed to Christianity. So Christianity has the same problem that Kant has in that regard, namely, well, I'm non-Christian, I'm not evil. I'm just like, I didn't choose to be non-Christian. I just was born that way. Then the issue here is like, as a Christian, you have to consider everybody who is not Christian as evil. But that's inconsistent. It cannot be articulated that way. So now with Kant, the problem is slightly different, although the same kind of logic, like everybody is rational. Everybody is potentially rational. So I'm not really making any empirical, historical, contingent distinctions among people. I do not discriminate against anybody in terms of their capability of morality. Capability. Now, of course, if they don't act morally, I can, but at least they don't start out with this position of being disadvantaged or incapable of morality. A lot of Christians believe, like, savages, you should not consider them. They are not even human beings. They should not be considered because they are not Christians, blah, blah. So for Kant, nobody is in that position. So I can never judge anybody on the basis of any contingent circumstances that they might have. So, but you still have the problem of explaining evil, because the only possibility of not acting according to reason is acting according to laws of nature. Then the problem is like, why should I be evil just because I'm following laws of nature? Now, in human beings, to everybody, Christian, non-Christian, whatever, whoever, we always attribute the possibility, the power, not to act according to laws of nature. So you cannot use laws of nature as an excuse, because you are a rational being. Now, sometimes I don't even have to use it as an excuse. I'm hungry, I'm eating, but I don't always have to do that, because I also have a will. And that is, for Kant, the solution. So I don't know heteronomy causes a contradiction, but it certainly causes this tension. That's a good question. And you had a question following that, yes?
Well, I'm just clarifying. And so Kant stresses autonomy because it's based on the self, which is something that's common to all rational beings. It comes from your rationality rather than coming from something that might be subjective to your experience.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, that's correct. And it doesn't depend on your circumstances. It doesn't depend on your empirical conditions. Yes. So do you think, not feel, do you think you understand the logic of his thinking? Which will be the main thing that I would be looking for in your papers when you explain his notion of freedom. So you really need to make it your own. Like, I understand it. I can even explain it to other people. Geneva, I'm expecting a thumbs up from you. Thank you. Anybody else? Connor, thanks. Blake, are you good? Liesel, Michelle. Thank you. That's such a comforting sign to have a thumbs up. I can't wait to get into the classroom. I mean, it's like, this is driving me crazy. Okay, any other questions?
I have a quick question.
Okay.
So in the bottom of page 55, he talks about moral ought and necessary would. And I know ought is about imperatives, but I'm not really sure about necessary would mentioned here.
Okay. From this standpoint, he's conscious of having a good will, which is by no admission constitutes the law. This is the better person, right? For bad will belong to him as a member of the world of sense, a law whose authority acknowledged while he transgresses, even while he transgresses it. The moral ought is therefore a necessary would, insofar as he's a member of the intelligible law and is thought by the word. Okay, so a rational being would act in this way.
Mhm.
I know that. And I know that as a rational being. But I also know that they don't. Because they are not just rational, but they also belong to the world of sense. They have desires, they have inclinations, they have a body, etc. Therefore, to the extent that I belong to the world of sense, that is expressed as an ought. I should do it.
Yeah.
I would do it if I were not to belong to the world of sense. But since I do, I ought to act that way. I can say that because I am aware of the fact that I don't always act according to laws of morality.
Okay.
But Kant believes that every rational being, to the extent that they belong to the kingdom of ends, know how they would act.
Mhm.
But they don't act that way, therefore formulates the imperative. See, this is related to what we read before when he was talking about categorical and imperative. So on page 24, on page 23, right after the section that Nadia read on page 23, he says, if reason infallibly determines the will, then in this case, such a being actions which are recognized to be objectively necessary are also subjectively necessary. The will is a faculty of choosing only that which reason, independently of inclination, recognizes as being practically necessary, i.e. as good. But we don't have only reason, so it is not always objective. But if reason of itself does not sufficiently determine the will, because we also belong to the world of sense, in which not reason, but our inclinations determine our will, and that's on page 13, because our will is at the crossroads, or if the will submits also to subjective conditions, incentives, which do not always agree with objective conditions, because I want to act selfish, even though I know that would be wrong. In a word, if the will does not in itself completely accord with reason, which it doesn't in our case, then we say ought. That's the command. You ought to act in this way. Then actions which are recognized as objectively necessary are subjectively contingent, and the determination of such a will according to objective law is a necessitation. To say that the relation of objective laws to a will not thoroughly good is represented as determination of the will of a rational being by principles of reason, which the will does not necessarily follow because of its own nature. So the representation of an objective principle, insofar as it necessitates will, is called a command. Reason commands you. Reason say you ought to act this way, and the formula is the imperative, because reason tries to determine the will of a person who also is in the world of sense, not just in the world of sensible, which is the world of reason.
Okay.
So I'm a finite human being with a capacity for reason, but I'm also selfish. I have incentives. I have a family that I want to protect. I am I'm not always doing objectively what would be done.
Oh, okay. So like if you are not in the sensible world, you would act in that way, but if you are, since you are in the sensible world, you ought to act
Yes,
accordingly.
the first part was if you only were in the intelligible world.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Only if you were only in the intelligible world, you were just like pure reason, then you would always act, and there shouldn't even be a question of what you ought to do.
Okay. I got it.
Now, of course, he believes that every human being has this capacity. Now, I'm sure that a lot of you, when you look at human beings, you are having trouble believing it. I'm sure Erin does too, because that's what she said. So when you look at certain human beings, you sort of like, well, they don't seem to have the capacity to act. But they have the capacity, maybe they don't actualize that capacity. Because you look at them and you say they don't have the capacity, which is a very problematic thing to say, because if they didn't have the capacity, you wouldn't even say that they are not acting, because you attribute to them at least the possibility, you are looking for that. You don't have the same disappointment, I hope, from animals that you have from human beings when they act in a certain way, right? So like when your dog bites somebody, it's not the same as your child biting or killing somebody, right? Because you say like, oh, poor dog, that's what it's supposed to do. Like they cannot like act in any other way, but you attribute a certain power for human beings that they should not act, they ought not to act according to the world of sensibility. So Kant doesn't discriminate in that. Well, that's a really wrong thing to say, because he's a huge racist, etc. But Kantian philosophy is not really like, should not allow at least any discrimination. And I keep saying this because I feel morally sort of responsible to tell you Kant as an empirical human being was not very good at all. But from our perspective today, he wasn't like killing people or like torturing people or something like that, but his ideas are considered to be very problematic, if not straight out evil, from our perspective now. So, ideas about other things, like, you know, he writes about like a lot of things, different things. You should know that. So when you encounter Kant in his racism, for example, you should not think that I'm endorsing that or something like that. Which I'm, by the way, teaching next semester. If you are planning to take Earlham seminar, I'm teaching on racism and as a European concept of racism, race, and Kant really helped to develop that notion. So again, I keep saying this. Love philosophy, hate philosophers. I mean, don't hate them. I mean, who cares? But you don't have to like them. I'm not endorsing them. I'm not putting posters of them on my wall or something like that. So it's not like yeah, you should never look at it this way. This is about ideas, not about people. Anybody is doing like Earlham seminar next spring? No, nobody. Okay. Oh, you are? In the spring? You didn't take it in the fall?
I thought you meant fall too. No, not in the spring.
But you all have to do Earlham seminar in the spring. If you are a first year, if you haven't already done so.
Yeah, my seminar is fall 2, not fall 1.
But that's the fall seminar.
Yeah.
There's also a spring seminar.
Right. I haven't registered for that yet.
Okay, good. How many of you already took Earlham seminar in the spring? You did, of course, not first year student. I mean, if you are a second year or third year. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that means still 15 people who haven't. So. Okay, yeah. Okay, any other questions? I like it this way. Just when we figured out to do class better, it's over. So that's the predicament of 7-week class. Okay, I need to, I'm gonna stop here to recording. So I'm gonna ask you a couple of things.